you for attending this webinar hosted by Veterans for Peace for Ukraine. That's Veterans for, quote, Peace for Ukraine. And we are a caucus of the National Veterans for Peace, US-based organization of military veterans. Even our caucus is very controversial within our organization. And this webinar will hopefully inform members of our organization in the broader peace movement. What is happening in Ukraine? What do Ukrainians feel, believe, and are enduring in the face of the Russian invasion? And I think we have a fantastic panelist today to help educate American progressive leftists, anti-imperialists on what can peace advocates, anti-war advocates in the U.S. do to express real peace solidarity with the people of Ukraine as they face a horrific, unjust, illegal, immoral invasion by their neighbor to the east. And I'm going to turn it over to Yosh. Thanks, Yosh.
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everybody. I'm Yosh. I'm from Ukraine. I'm currently in Ukraine, and I represent Feminist Workshop, which is NGO. It is a small organization with big community. And I'm really happy to be here today because it's time for us Ukrainians to rebuild our connections with Western world in the new challenging circumstances. For our side, it's war and the need to organize our lives around the self-defense and around death of our loved ones. So I'm glad to have possibilities to just sit and talk. And this time we will talk about research work and about activism in Ukraine. And I'm pleased to introduce our two guests. Alona Liasheva, she is a postdoctoral research at Center for Eastern European Studies at the University of Bremen, activist of all Ukrainian movement Соціальний рух, which is translated as social movement, and co-editor of Commons Journal. Alona is originally from Kyiv, now she is in Lviv. And Karyna Lazaruk, she is MA in Media and Communications. Her practice moves between graphic design, research, and activism. Since Russian full-scale invasion on Ukraine, she made research on Russian propaganda in Telegram, which has become a popular channel during the war for Ukrainians to check news. Research is exploring content and the connections of anonymous Telegram channel with Russian government. Karyna also worked at non-profit organization Institute of Mass Communication. And Karyna moved to Germany from Lviv during the war, but she's joining us from Ternopil, which is a city in the western part of Ukraine. Thank you for coming. So I will ask two questions for our speakers, and then we will have time for your questions. And the first question I will ask to Karyna. So can you tell us a bit about your work and how Russian propaganda was looked before the full-scale war on Ukraine, and how does it look like now? What topics are used more often, and also how can one protect himself or herself from becoming a victim of propaganda?
Thank you for inviting me. Okay, I would try to answer on the first question about what was the Russian propaganda before the full-scale invasion, as I understood. So Russian propaganda is a very complex phenomena. So it was everywhere in different medias. But I can tell you about main narratives of Russian propaganda 2 years before before invasion. because we did in the Institute of Mass Information, we did a research on this topic, pro-Russian and anti-Western conspiracy theories of information war. And one of the main narrative which was popular it was external governance of Ukraine, also discrediting Ukraine revolution, Ukrainian revolution of dignity, I mean Euromaidan, that also they told that Ukraine is a failed state, and of the legend of US democracy, because Russian propaganda likes to, and now it's still the topic, the theme of information war, that Ukraine is a puppet of USA. So yeah, I think it's and a failed state. So it's, I think, the most the biggest narratives of Russian propaganda. And could you please remind me the second, how not became, I saw that questions will be after my presentation, but I can say now how to not become a victim of information war, of like information psychological operations. The answer is very simple, is critical thinking, but I know that it's very hard to do sometimes, because we are overwhelmed of information now through every gadget, through every screen, everywhere. So it's hard to stop and think critically, when, especially when you get news very that touch you very much. So I think that one of the characteristic of propaganda or informational war is, I mean, information of propaganda is that it's very emotional. It's not rational. So if you feel that your mind is starting to change after you know something from anything, it means that you are the target of information weapon. Also, you should read only respectable media. I mean, media that have that have journalists and that write articles under their names, and you always can ask like questions to this media, like why do you write this, or like, you know, who made this content. I don't recommend to read anonymous channels or YouTube, anything anonymous. You should read like journalists, not bloggers. So I think it's...
Yeah, Karyna, I think we a bit misunderstood each other. So you can just show your presentation right now.
Oh, okay.
So about 15 minutes, please, if you can.
Super. So now you will maybe better understand what I have told. I want to share my screen. So yeah, I will speak about Russian propaganda, Russian informational warfare, and my research that I did in the beginning of full-scale invasion. I did it in Amsterdam with students and Professor Mark tutors. So I will show you how Russia used one of the most popular social platform, Telegram, to deny its war crimes committed by Russian army. So first of all, I would like to make a daily reminder of what is Russian propaganda, what like roots it have, and ideology. So Russia is a militaristic, imperialistic, and dictatorship state. They don't have any like human rights or freedom of speech. They lie even to their own citizens. They use disinformation, they use fakes. I will show you in this speech, and conspiracy theories, as I already mentioned. And in this year, we faced a lot of genocidal rhetoric from the TV broadcasters of Russia. And I think many of us heard about nuclear blackmail, and Russians also make like humiliation of everyone, like Westerns, Ukrainians, everybody. So now today we have a lot of sources of information, and I will and sources, of course, of propaganda, and I will tell you about one specific source, about a platform called Telegram. I know that it's not so popular in USA, so I will briefly tell you how it works. Telegram is the platform made by a Russian guy, Pavel Durov. Now he is not Russian, but he is original Russian. And they position this app like Messenger, but this is more than a messenger, and this is very important to understand, because it's like a social platform which let you create your own chats, group chats, and channels, and stay anonymous, and share a lot of content, and they don't have like censorship like in Facebook or in Instagram. They even the channels appear that public that make very like graphic content. They don't do nothing with that. Before, a lot of users will send mails, and it's not like in Facebook. So yeah, and anonymous, like it's a dark net, let's call it that way. So first months after full-scale invasion of Russia, I was curious with the idea of finding evidences of Kremlin war crimes in information sphere, because it's my profession. I work in media, and I think that Russian propaganda plays a significant role in this war, because I witnessed a lot of Russian propaganda even in Ukrainian media before the war, and I understand how it works with people. So they weaponize information and spreading fakes, manipulation, disinformation. And I already mentioned and told you about narratives before the great like full-scale invasion. The narratives that they spread into the Russian information sphere, into the Ukrainian information sphere, that Ukraine is a failed state, that USA is a government, USA is in our country, and something like this. It's not true. So, and let's move to this channel again. So I found the channel called War on Fakes, which was created on the first day of invasion, on the 24th of February. And gained, you can see on the right side, subscribers number grows, and this growth was like first week 100,000 subscribers. It's a very who read this. So I decided to investigate what make like tricky things. They take told you that have 700,000 subscribers, and on the like creation dates chronicle you see different channels with the same name in Telegram, but these channels like war fakes, Russian city, like Samara, war fakes, Belgorod, war fakes, like they link it to the different cities, and they create a whole network of these channels. But target audience of this channel is mostly Russians, because the content is more about Russia, about about, of course, about Russian war in Ukraine, but for Russian audience. It's important, not for Ukrainians, but maybe Ukrainians also read this, because I heard some narratives from this channel from people. So that's how the avatars looks like, of like one same name, different cities, and how the post looks like. Every day they make 25-30 posts without weekends. It's a lot. You have to like have an office, like 10, maybe 12, 20 people who create this content. It's a big team. So the structure of this manipulations is the following. So they take real news title. For example, a year ago, Russians committed massacre in Bucha. They killed a lot of civilians. They raped, killed, and I think many of us here know this case. If you don't know, you can Google and you will see some photos from this atrocity. So they take title, Russian military has left Bucha, leaving huge casualties among the civilian population. It's true. I'm not gonna prove you that it's true, because it's like common sense that it's a fact. But Russians make it like a fake, and then they debunk this fake, so-called fake, but they don't use like rational arguments or anything, photos or satellite photos. No, they just write it like this story raised many questions, like the body is puzzling, the corpse moves, and la la la, and it's not like even debunking, but it, I don't know, maybe it works for those who want to believe in it, if you know what I mean. So there is another screenshot of this, what happened in Bucha, a full analysis of Ukrainian provocation, a situation in Bucha, what actually happened. It's like the style of Russian propaganda to make a lot of different variation of what could be there, many different variation of truth. So we collected all this data, and we read a lot of this stuff, and make a quantitative analysis, quantitative and qualitative, of Russian narratives, of top narratives of this channel. And here is like screenshot of the normal media wrote about Bucha. And we like saw which narratives was more popular in this channel, and denial of war crimes against civilians and infrastructures was the most popular. And the second one was blaming and accusing Ukrainians creating fakes. So this channel is about denial of war crimes and blaming Ukrainians in creating fakes. You also can see other narratives that appear in this channel. Discreditation of president of Ukraine, denial of victories of Ukrainian army, blaming and accusing Ukrainians as Nazi. It's also very popular and very, how to say, effective information weapon to call Ukrainian Nazis. So yeah, they also use it. And for 3 months, March, April, and May, these two narratives were most popular in this channel. Also, I would like to show you another case, the case of bombarding of maternity house in Mariupol. It was on 14th of March previous year. We see photos of Evgeny Maloletka. He's a Ukrainian photographer. He awarded a lot of nomination during this year because he was like he and his team, they were on the very dangerous zone in the most one of the most dangerous city, Mariupol, and they made this photo. So of course, war fake channel, right, that this is not true, that they used the models, that people not real, and that in the time there were not like pregnant women and civilians and other civilians, but there were Azov, like Nazi, and that's why they bombarded this place full of civilians. And one of interesting things that I saw during the research is ties to the Russian government, of course. And when we analyzed the network and we analyzed who spread this content, first was Maria Zakharova. She's spokeswoman of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. She is quite famous because she is always on the screens. And she made 2 publications about this channel. One is a promo publication, like read this channel, read this. Also, they have a website, read this website on different languages, English, French, Spanish, Chinese, and another publication was about exactly bombarding maternity house in Mariupol. She called it information terrorism, and she gave a link on the debunking post of the Warfakes channel. And also,
I will ask you to be a bit faster because we have to save time for Alona.
Yeah, it's the last slide. So we also can see the connections between Ministry of Defense of Russia. They 261 times it was like during first 5 months they reposted posts from Warfakes, like Ministry of Defense of the Russia. And Solovyov, he is one of the famous propagandistic guys. So we also find evidences of the Kremlin connected to this information operation, propaganda, and yeah, that's all. That's not all, but I hope you have a question, so I will ask you them when on my time.
Yeah, thank you, Karyna. I also encourage you to type your questions in chat, and some of them we will answer in written form, and some we will speak about, because I saw already the first question is quite like we don't have researchers to answer with some proofs to this question, but we can like just share our feelings about the impact of Russian propaganda in Ukraine among our circles and something like this, if you are interested in this. So Alona, are you here? I wanted to move to you, and I have questions for you. What topics have become the most relevant for Commons, which is the leftist social media during last year? What kind of feedback do you get from the audience? And also for you as a researcher who used to study housing issues, what do you research now and why?
Yes, thank you. Hope you can hear me well. In case,
Yes.
just type in the chat if something goes wrong. Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. I think that you know, it's the first right thing to do when you want to get to know what's going on in Ukraine, is to actually turn to Ukrainians. So I thank you not only for inviting me, but for thinking in this way, that first of all, we need to hear people who are actually experiencing something, even if, you know, they are not some prominent whatever speakers or researchers. Yeah, I also want to thank Karyna for this amazing presentation. As I have, you know, the platform, I want to comment on how, you know, also Ukrainian civil society and Ukrainian left probably underestimated the power of Russian propaganda, because yes, it has like this very, I don't know, modernist way of propaganda, saying that like, yes, Russia and Russian world is the best nation, whatever, Ukrainians do not exist. And this kind of, you know, propaganda that when you hear it, you easily understand that it's propaganda. But at the same time, it has this, you know, another side, and that's what your research actually shows, just amazing, how it makes you question things, how it says that, you know, things are not that simple as they're presented. And of course, in activist circles, we like to be critical. We are always, you know, questioning things. And that's why I think sometimes, you know, there is a click between some people who are critical about regimes, about states, about capitalism, about wars. And then there is this propaganda which says, you know, we have this interpretation and that interpretation. And unfortunately, it did work for, of course, for many Russians, for some Ukrainians, and of course, for many people internationally. And it's something we, you know, on daily basis trying to oppose. And yeah, I'm gonna talk about experience of our journal, which we also, you know, we're also working in this media sphere. So I'm part of the collective of Commons Journal. It's a journal which was organized more than 10 years ago by people who, like, mainly from academic circles, but also activist circles. And from the very beginning of this media, we are super open that we are on the left. And of course, we do not have like a news feed, and we do not have, you know, some sort of quick journalism. We either produce slow journalism kind of articles and other content, and it comes from a critical anti-capitalist perspective. And throughout these years, more than 10 years, our audience has grown just a lot, because from a small, like, marginal journal, which was only read by small group of activists, we became a journal which is read on the level of other media which are more mainstream. But because, like, mainstream media, they have, you know, news feed and this like quick content, they get more attention. But if we compare like an long read on some mainstream media and our journal, it's at least the same level of audience we have. And from the very first days of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, we enlarged, of course, our international audience. You know, we were ready to speak in English, to speak in French about what's going on in Ukraine from a perspective of Ukrainian resistance, from like anti-imperialist vision of this war, and seeing Russia as, you know, the only imperialist army which is now on Ukrainian territory. And I think it's very well that we, you know, managed to become this voice. At the same time, we got a lot of criticism, and it was, you know, it's already goes for a long time when we feel how it's difficult to bring this Ukrainian voice internationally, though you are like, why don't you want to hear, you know, what Ukrainians, researchers and activists say? At the same time, we managed to develop our Ukrainian audience as well, but mainly because it's not that we changed something in what we do for our Ukrainian audience. It's rather we, in general, in Ukraine now experience a very intensive growth in attention to politics. Like, people, you know, when there are bombs flying on your house, they start thinking about politics. It's sad, but it's true. And it's not only a matter, like, it's not only what commons now experiences. Also other groups from like traditional to feminist to any kind of activist groups experience the same process. And our main our main, you know, topics we work on for Ukrainian audience are, of course, analysis of the ongoing neoliberal reforms, of ongoing, you know, and it's it's very strange that, yes, okay, we now all think about the war, but at the same time, the economy is changing. Social processes of excluding some groups, they're still there. So we try not to only, you know, talk about the war, but we also try to show how the war collides, for example, with reform of education or reform of medicine, which unfortunately are quite oriented towards this market understanding of how things work. And we also try to explain that if we want to win this war, there is a crucial need to also rethink how our economy is organized. I don't know if you heard about it, but recently there was this new, neoliberal cut. The government tried to take away salaries of our soldiers, and there was a need, to criticize the government that they are trying to pay less to people who defend us. But of course, when we talk about war, we try to talk about it not in the way it's presented in mainstream media, that it's war of some politicians, of some armies. We put a huge emphasis on seeing this war as something which is experienced by different groups of people, by working class regions. I don't know, as for example, miners in Kryvyi Rih, which is central southern Ukraine, by transgender communities, by LGBT people, and so on. And also this year we started a project which I find super interesting. We see how both in Ukraine and abroad, our war and our experiences of war are often portrayed through this opposition of West and East, of Russia and NATO. And of course, we cannot do much about it, but we can at least try to bring people on the left, to bring activists from different peripheral countries which experience different imperialist aggressions. And it's super difficult now to talk, for example, in Brazil, why do you need to support Ukraine? Because Brazil knows very well what is American imperialism. At the same time, it's very difficult to speak in Ukraine. Why? Like anti-American ideas in Brazil are something we need to understand and put together with our experience. And of course, we're trying to establish as much more connections with people and activists in the countries which experience the same kind of things, like in Syria and in many other places. And I myself also write for our journal, but I write my text basing the articles on the research I do as a sociologist in the University of Bremen. And though for a long time I used to study urban sociology, I was very much into thinking about what kind of housing policy could fit our context, our post-Soviet context. But when, cities are started being destroyed by Russian missiles, I realized that housing policy, yes, we need social-oriented housing policy, but before that, we need, to save the cities so that there are still people and there are still buildings before we think, how to redistribute housing in an equal way. And the last year, I'm very much focused on understanding Ukrainian resistance. And by this, I mean that I look at Ukrainian opposition to Russian invasion, not through this mainstream vision that there is Ukrainian state, Ukrainian army, there is Zelensky or whoever. I try to listen to people who are actually on the daily basis are doing something to this resistance to go on. From volunteers to people who just ideologically, support, to people who are trying, to bring their life back together and the idea I'm now, the main like hypothesis I'm trying to prove in my research that as we can see, yes, vast majority of Ukrainians are united, but this very simple common goal that we need to get rid of Russia out of our territories. This is something, yes, it's a common sense of this resistance. But Ukrainians are very different people. There are so many different groups who now are very much joined, but at the same time, every group, every region has its own kind of understanding of what's going on. And why Russia invaded Ukraine and what's happening. And I'm trying to focus on this like different explanations, different like narratives that are behind this common goal of resisting the invasion. And there are a lot of interesting things to share, of course, but I probably, as I now work on the topic, I wanted to share this insight from my research of how misleading sometimes Ukrainian politics are seen. And it's very, it's a big thing that in Ukraine, support of NATO grew. So it was quite high. I mean, and now if you look at the surveys, it seems that like Ukrainians are very pro-NATO, But when you are actually trying to understand why people answer, this question, this yes, we want to be part of NATO. And when you ask people, what kind of role do you think NATO, US and, the West plays in this war, you can get very different narratives. Of course, there is this, mainstream narrative that yes, Western countries are our allies, they need to help us, they help us, thanks for the weapons, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, there is a lot of criticism of NATO and West. Ukrainians are very well aware of crimes, of war crimes that US has done all over the world. Ukrainians sometimes, like Ukraine, like what I hear from people in the interviews I conduct as a sociologist is very close to what I sometimes hear, in this geopolitical narrative that like, yes, America has an interest in this war. But at the same time, the same people who are very critical of what is NATO and US in nowadays world, at the same time, they say, but we understand it, but we still need support coming from this part of the world. And it is very, interesting kind of thing because Ukrainians speak, so it seems to be a contradiction, but when you try to understand why people say this seemingly contradictory things, that NATO is horrible, we need weapons from countries which are part of NATO, and we need their support. But when you try to understand why people are seemingly contradictory in what they say, it's very important to look from which position are they saying this. They're saying it from a position of a person who sees how his or her town, city is being now destroyed by Russian rockets. And of course, even if you're super critical about other imperialist countries which exist in this world, you do not really care that much when you are sitting in your kitchen and see how rockets fall on your city. And the same, you know, contradictions are often seen when I discuss with people our government. Of course, we can see how Ukrainians do support Zelensky. Support of Zelensky is very strong in the country. But when you ask people, okay, but why do you support him? Will you support him if he does this or that? We see how support of the state administration in Ukraine now is very conditional. First of all, it's conditioned by the ability of the leaders of the country to go on with resisting Russia. And, you know, to sum up, I think it's unfortunately, media sphere in global capitalism work in a way that we want to quickly understand what's goes on here or there, and we do not have, you know, time to ask Ukrainians. We just see, okay, the survey in Ukraine says that Ukrainians are for NATO and for Zelensky, and we see that NATO is not really an amazing institution. And Zelensky is a neoliberal president. So why do we need to support those Ukrainians? At the same time, things are, yes, they're much more complicated. When you try to look at the place from where the person speaks, from a peripheral country which for years experienced domination from both sides of the globe, Russian aggression and like pressure from IMF, from many other neoliberal institutions which are trying to push us to have the economy they want from us. And now it's the time when, you know, finally somehow we have a chance to get rid at least from one oppressor who is, yes, way worse for us now than, you know, other. And we're using this chance, and we're using this chance already for a year. It's amazing how for a year people can go on in this kind of regime. And yes, you know, I think that we need solidarity because it's difficult. It's very difficult to live like this. And before, you know, denying like what Ukrainians think or say, like just try to imagine how is it on a daily basis live knowing that like now there is an air alarm in the city where your mom is, and like Russian drones which Russia brought from Iran are attacking your city. How on daily basis you read that people whom you know are losing their beloved ones. And if in this kind of circumstances Ukrainians are ready to go on, probably, yeah, it means something. Sorry, I became very pathetic in the end, but yeah, we live in the pathetic times.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alona. I now see that we have a lot of questions in chat. I don't know how to sum up all this, so maybe I just will read several of them, and then those of you who wants to answer any of that questions, I think some of these questions can't be answered by us because they are maybe too ridiculous about from my perspective. For example, I can't say anything about dead Stepan Bandera. And but if you want to answer something on anything, please go on. And yeah, so I will just read from the beginning all the questions, and I will start with the first. You said Ukraine is not a puppet of the US. However, there is a recording of Victoria Nuland, a US official, speaking in 2014 and bragging about how the US overthrew the former Ukraine president and installed the current one. What is your evidence that Ukraine is not a puppet?
It's me said that this narrative, and I can like answer this question, which is more like just repeating of this narrative. I don't know anything about Victoria. Where was Victoria Nuland in 2014? But I was in Ukraine, and it's the Ukrainian people through Yanukovych, like also like a mini dictator who was like totally pro-Russian. And it was a situation when Ukraine have to sign Euro integration document, like to became like closer economically to European Union. And like the next day, Yanukovych, former president, about what you who you mentioned, he should go to Davos and sign this agreement between countries. But he, in the last moment, he decided not to do this. It was like absolutely voluntaristic decision. And people told and people started to gather on city centers to protest this decision, because we are not slaves. We are living in the democratic country, and we don't want that guy from like from I don't know who president or whatever will change his mind. So yeah, you speak about Euromaidan, and I was like a participant as a many thousand millions of Ukrainians were participant of through overthrew the former Ukrainian president. So I don't know, is it an evidence, but that Ukrainian, I don't know, I even can't understand how US connected to this revolution, frankly speaking, because I remember these days, and it was like protests of the people living in Ukraine, and that's all.
Yeah, thank you. Alona also was speaking a bit about Zelensky, and that he is now very strong. So I think it's also not very even something important to discuss the way one president was elected, if they at the present moment they gain a lot of support of the population, and it is a real support. And also I think it's maybe can be quite naive to think that quite big country with 44 millions of population can be manipulated. Maybe some parts of our society, of course, has some connections, some financial connections with bigger states, but not all the country and all the citizens. And also maybe I saw another questions which can be connected.
Yosh, I just want to
yeah.
I just want to jump in quickly. And from what I understand, the 2014 Revolution of Dignity, Maidan, I think this is important from what I see, not to Ukrainians so much, but to the Western to the Western left perspective on Ukraine and their understanding of it, because we saw in real time about 14 months ago, last February, Russia declaring that they weren't going to invade Ukraine, making fun of people who said that they were, and then they did it. We all saw that. It was impossible to not see that. So the left is then searching for, well, there has to be some reason why they did that beyond just wanting to wipe out Ukraine. So they've gone back to 2014, which is a distant memory for the Western perspective on Ukraine. It's far back that, well, then the propaganda that we learned about today kind of works better. And that, okay, back in 2014 was the coup, it was the CIA coup that overthrew the Ukrainian government and installed the US imperialist puppets. And then maybe then the Russians were persecuted in the Donbass, and then that's why Crimea had to be invaded, because it wasn't really Ukraine to begin with. So we're going, the Russian propaganda works much better in, attached to 2014 than it does to the 2022 current invasion. So I just want to throw it out there. That's why I think we keep hearing more and more about the mass uprising of people in Ukraine, which you would think would be celebrated by leftists when the people rise up for the progression and progress of society, but then it's twisted into and dismissed as a CIA coup. So those are my 2 cents. I'll get out of your way.
Thank you. Maybe I want to jump to question of Margaret. Can you say more about the specifics of US imperialism in Ukraine? We hear that President Zelensky wants more from the US in order to prosecute the war. And I can start with my perspective. It's not like general vision of imperialism, but as I'm working in civil society and in geosphere, I saw big grants, big foundations working in Ukraine from the US government especially. We receiving a lot of financial support for our civil society, especially after the Revolution of Dignity. And what I'm seeing and what I'm addressing and criticizing in my work is that they have all this money, they come and they have a lot of regulations or strings attached. So when you receive this money to develop civil society, to help some people and to develop communities and so on, you ending up with filling some ridiculous forms, because it seems like people who are sitting in US offices, they just don't trust Ukrainians as professionals, because they have their best policy, their best laws, and everything that we are doing here in Ukraine in our local context, we are supposed to do with the American regulations, and we supposed to sometimes they even want to teach us how to organize our internal processes and how to develop our communities and so on. And it seems like we are like some not educated people who just can't be professional without saviors from more developed countries. So I think it's one of the fields where imperialism reflects. Alona and Karyna, do you want to add something about on this question?
Yeah, I would say that from the very, beginning, from 90s, the Western imperialism in Ukraine and many other post-Soviet countries, including Russia, was very economic. And that's also a huge, mistake which was done, believing that we could, somehow regulate Russia. Because of course, Western countries need Russia because of gas. This is, simple as not only gas, but that's, the key factor in this whole story. And there was this idea that we could somehow manage this wild capitalism that started in 90s in our countries. And of course, for a long time, it was purely economic influence, but now, yes, Ukraine takes weapons from the US, but the question is, why? Why are we in this place that we need to ask the powers which are probably not the best powers in the world. Unfortunately, we do not have some amazing socialist or social democratic state which is ready to give us weapons we need to defend ourselves. But there is US, and it would be nice if it was not this horrible imperialist, power, but there is nothing else, but the other reason why we do it, because Russia invaded us more than a year ago. Russia did it. There is no other imperialist army on territory of Ukraine apart from Russian army. And the third thing, the third reason why we ask this, because it's not Zelensky. Yes, practically it's like Zelensky who goes and shakes hands with Biden and everyone else. But he also does it because he knows that if tomorrow he stops, then Ukrainians will throw him away and he will be replaced by someone else.
Okay, so let's move to second question in chat. Europeans have never been able to all get just along with each other, often even within the same country. It's been centuries upon centuries of white-on-white violence and slaughter in Europe. Why should we in the US spend hundreds of billions of dollars on Ukraine when we have so many dire problems right here at home? Why is it our business that Ukraine can't decide to just remain neutral, what Russia demanded, and get along with its Russian neighbor? Yeah, maybe some part of this claim is fair enough. Why should you care? From my perspective, I think that you can decide either you want to care about other people, other lives. Maybe for me, it's more ethical questions if I care about people dying in other countries or I'm not. I think the central point of this decision is the fact of death. So you compare the prosperity of your life in your country and the death of people in other country, and you can, of course, it's your life and your country. You can decide to choose prosperity and your own to deal only just with your own problems. But then I think we live in a global economy, and you also gain some, I think US population and US economy gain some advantages from the more poor countries. And also if I will return to the question of imperialism, I think sometimes some loans given to Ukraine or some other economical cooperations the process of negotiations during crisis time and during the war is organized like that. You really can gain more advantages of a country being not so strong economically as US, but at the same time not being a wild field with destroyed cities, because for now we have some resources to sell and some opportunities to cooperate with the US, and we don't know if it will be so after the destroying of all Ukraine. And also I want to address about neutrality. I think it is not true at all. It's also some sort of Russian propaganda that Ukraine just so it, as I understood, this idea about neutrality of Ukraine, it is connected to the idea that it's Ukrainian blame. It's a blame of Ukrainian government that this war started because of some our decisions, but it is not. You know, we as in feminist movement in Ukraine, we compare this logic with the logic of victim blaming. When some person are suffering from domestic violence, and you ask this person why she or he was beaten, instead of asking why the person attacking started to be violent. Maybe Alona, Karyna, do you want to add something on this, or let's move
Yeah, I mean, I would probably, rather analyze this question because it's an amazing example of how some lives matter, some lives do not matter. When, I saw how, I got to know about the level of institutional and other forms of racism in the US without not, I read about it when I was, I don't know, like 16 or something. I was like, wow, what the fuck? Black people, I never met a Black person in my life at that point. And I was like, no, this is not something which should happen. Like, yes, you need to support Ukrainian resistance because people in Ukraine supported BLM, for example. But to be more practical, not like ethical in my answer, yes, for example, because Ukraine is a country which sells its resources to many Western countries, including the US, and these countries exploit our resources because many Ukrainians come as a cheap labor force to US to clean your dishes, to take care of your kids, to do your nails, and so on. Because for years, people in countries like US never knew where Ukraine is on the map. Time to get to know.
Yeah, great time to live. And also, I think next one is connected to the previous. If you, Ukraine, want to feel safe, then make sure your neighbor, Russia, feels safe instead of Ukraine letting itself be used as proxy war owned by US, EU, and NATO. Karyna, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I want to comment these two questions. I think it's really good examples of like colonial thinking and racist thinking, because like formulation white on white violence, it's so strange for me. I didn't think about the color of the skin of people who like suffer from Russia. And yeah, and the second like it's not a question, it's just the thesis from Josip. And yeah, it's like we are not colony, that we shouldn't serve Russia to feel safe. Russia can do it like inside their own politics in normal way, but they don't they attacked it. Ukraine is not the one country that Russia attacked. Georgia, like they also in Syria, the troops in Africa, they are everywhere, not only in Ukraine. So Georgia also have to like make Russia feel safe. Or everybody should serve Russian afraid of being attacked or what?
Feeling of insecurity.
Alan asks, is Russian propaganda working? Is there a large minority of Ukrainians who believe it and want the government to negotiate with Russia? I already said that we don't have some data and research, so I think some, or do you?
No,
no?
that's a huge problem, that we cannot talk about such things with numbers, you know, because we cannot question people on occupied territories. What do they think? And even if we do, it means that, I mean, we put them in danger from they might be interrogated, they might be killed because they even answer like surveys. But compared to many other wars globally, in this case, it's very there is no like political subject which advocates for negotiation with Russia. We do not have any party, any NGO, any radical, I don't know, militarized organization which, you know, lobbies this kind of vision. So yes, probably some people are, you know, getting tired of the war and get depoliticized. There is a trend, you know, it's not strong, but of course for some people they're so tired of this life we live now that they do not have, you know, any kind of political opinion. Yeah, so my question, the short, no, there is no large minority of Ukrainians who want to negotiate because there is no like subject, political subject, no like party or something.
Yeah. I am a member of the Freedom Socialist Party, which supports the right of self-determination for the Ukrainian people. A statement here, and call for the defeat, immediate withdrawal of Russia. Are leftists and feminists in Ukraine generally aware that there is a sector of the movement here that break with those who support Russia or who would promote negotiation, peace that will violate the rights of Ukrainians? Also, would the speakers be willing to share their contact information so that we can communicate directly to exchange information and explore means for providing support to your work? So maybe Karyna and Alona, if you don't mind, you please just type your contacts in the chat. And yet, are you
I'm not ready to give my contacts to people who humiliate me because I think I'm Ukrainian. So Susan, I will answer you.
So the question of Susan was, are we in Ukraine generally aware that there is a sector of the movement here that breaks with those who support Russia and who would?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's like this. And I did my PhD in Italy and I'm very close, you know, to political circles there, and I know them very well. And now I see how groups split, organizations split, which were, you know, working together for like years, decades, and it's bad. Yes, it's bad that people, are not part of the same group anymore. But I think it's for a good reason, because this is not only about Ukraine. It's a very principal question. Are you ready, to step away from this understanding of the world, which used to be your optics, for years, that there is NATO and everything else is just like some defense operation against NATO. I know that a lot of left European, I'm not very well connected to American left, but I know people on the left in Europe. I know that for years it was their optics, and these optics helped them, to support Syrian resistance, to support Palestine. It was working, but now it's not working because world is changing and we need to change. But I say it with pity, because I personally know people who were working together for 40 years and now they have to split because of Ukrainian question. But it's not only Ukrainian question.
In the group that I work with here, Veterans for Peace, the optics really, since at least the Vietnam War, has worked very well. That our primary mission is to oppose U.S. imperialism because, well, we live in the U.S. and as veterans, we were, the stormtroopers for U.S. imperialism. So 99 out of 100 times opposing U.S. imperialism made a lot of sense. And yet now we find ourselves face to face with the horrors of Russian imperialism, what they're doing, what the Russian Empire is doing to your nation. And that optics falls short. And not only does it fall short, it feeds into, amplifies, reinforces Russia's propaganda against your nation that's effectively part of the war machine that's dropping bombs on your country. So we see that we can no longer stop at opposing U.S. intervention without critically taking that next question seriously.
Yeah, and also I'm thinking that of course, in this difficult for us Ukrainians times, we should find all possibilities and capacities to not only to think about stopping the war itself, but about some measures to defense further attacks of Russia, because we are in Ukrainian civil society. I hear discussion about the fact that if this war possibly could be stopped soon or not very soon, it doesn't mean that we will not have further attacks, or if not Ukraine, then will some other neighbor country of Russia can experience similar war. So I think it's very important for us to build strong communities, to build civil society with people who will be ready to deal with this, and also who, but not just move to other countries, to safer places and so on, and to produce some ideas how to challenge imperialisms altogether, to produce critical knowledge about this everyday imperialism, and to understand more that it is to live in the world with some big imperial, powerful imperial states. It is not safe, and it is always a question of time. Our peace world, it's a question of time. If it's not something regular and useful, not useful, but usual, to not have a war. in some in such a world. Yeah, so that's why we are sitting here and talking with you in a hope to build more understanding, connections, and solidarities. Alona started to answer some question in chat, so I will move to another one. Or do you want to say what you started to?
No, there is just very good question from Bianca about the desertion and acts of resistance of Russian soldiers in the war. I'm just recently was asking myself, the same. So first thing is that now in Russia there is a new wave of mobilization, and now this question of for many men and also women who like work as medical workers, it's the same issue that they can be drafted to the army, to the war. They probably even at this point it doesn't matter what do they think, they do not want to go. Is the other question why. And there are like several NGOs in Russia now helping people to desert and helping people to escape, like to hide, not to be drafted to the army. But the second question about examples of fraternization of Russian soldiers and Ukrainians and sources, that's a complicated question. I'm not, ready to answer because yes, like Ukrainian media often shares information about Russian units inside of Ukrainian army. There are at least like 2 of them, which one consists from people who changed the side, and the other one from another one, it has a lot of refugees from Russia who came, to Ukraine and then joined the army. Some of them were actually with far right background, but we're talking about separate people. But unfortunately, this is like the most covered up information now, probably even more than the number of deaths on both sides. It's very difficult to get to know what, goes on with people who changed side and so on. But I hope, with the time we will get to know more about this. But for sure, unfortunately, it's not like a massive thing. That's, that's our pain. Like, why do Russian people, okay, some of them are forcefully drafted to the army, but some go. Some trust the state and trust that probably they will not be sent to the front line. And in 2 weeks, they're at the front line killing, Ukrainians. But yeah.
Okay, I also saw 2 similar questions about support. Maybe this question should be the last. It will be good questions to end our webinar, as we are now running out of time. So I will read these 2 questions. What do you think, from Bianca first, what do you think the position should be of the solidarity movement here in the US, which demands the withdrawal of Russian troops and supports the right of Ukrainians of self-defense in relation of the announced IMF loans to Ukraine? And the second, greetings and many thanks from Ukraine Solidarity Campaign District and newly formed left groups from upstate New York State, USA. We support Ukraine's fight for national liberation against Russian imperialism, and locally we're pushing back against the Russian Lenin left and its propaganda. How best can we support you?
I just feel that I'm taking too much space, but I have an answer.
Some points, it's not all, but yeah, I can start with some points. The first will be that Alona already mentioned that to hear and to connect and cooperate with Ukrainians. You know, as a feminist organization, we often and usually choose to cooperate with feminists, not any expert, any other expert, but we always choose feminists to cooperate. And if you want to support Ukraine, you can cooperate with Ukrainians in any sphere. And in this cooperation, you can learn a lot, I think, and you can come up with your own ideas about how can you address all these issues. Second, I think it is important to address not only the fact of ongoing war, but also the fact of corruption in Russia, the fact of totalitarianism, very sexist and homophobic government, that this state, this government, like in this state, such kind of government should not exist in any country. Such government and such laws as in Russia should not exist. And I think it can be changed only with the help of international community, with rising awareness about the problems of such kind of government, because it is a danger for all the world. So, and in Ukraine, we during the war we have many initiatives which analyze different, for example, cultural products or some even music and literature and how history was written. We analyze everything which was done by Russians, and we can find quite easily that all this sexist, homophobic, and imperialism are reflected in this product. So it is not only in government, but it is this war and this regime also exist because of all this imperialist way of thinking and way of doing their work. So analyze this and criticize this together with Ukrainians. I think it in long perspective, it can help for the world, not only for Ukraine. Karyna, maybe you want to add?
I know that we have Solidarity Collective organization in Ukraine, which supports anarchists and queer people, LGTB+, who joined armed forces of Ukraine. So they have two types of, like they support combatants, and also they support civilians who stayed in like near the front lines. And also they build like network of anarchists in Ukraine, Germany, like elsewhere. So I think the donation for this organization and informational support for them may be very good support. And on my opinion, the best support is like donation to the Ukrainian army, because the faster we win this war, the better. And yeah, and the less people we will lose, because in Ukrainian army, a lot of artists, a lot of musicians, a lot of like people who are not, it's like civilians, armed civilians. It's not like super troops, NATO or not. It's like ordinary people who just went to defend our country.
Alona, your points and
Yeah,
some maybe final thoughts.
Yeah, I actually wanted to say the same and second Karyna, that now there are a lot of groups, self-organized groups doing a lot of work, like Feminist Workshop, which is Yosh is part of, or organizing shelters for refugees, for women and kids. I'm part of Социальный рух, who helps trade unions now a lot. Those like trade unions which are civilians and also trade union activists who now join the army. There is solidarity collectives who are supporting our friends and comrades who are now defending us. There is many other organization, and you can just follow them, and sometimes they ask even for a small thing, like I don't know, $10. But if everyone, gives $10, then we can buy people what they need. Because yes, Ukrainian state is not, was not ready for this kind of horrific events. At the same time, yes, it's quite a neoliberal state where things do not work, and there is also a lot of corruption. So often we need to do things with our hands. There is not enough shelters. We organize shelters. Our comrades who joined the army, they do not have all the needed equipment. We buy them that equipment. Now the situation is way better than it was a year ago. But still, there is a constant need for us to function as activist groups who do one or the other job. And it's, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I also thank you for audience for the questions and especially for supportive comments. I saw but not read, sorry. Yeah, thank you for your interest for our movement and for Ukraine in general. Jeff, do you want to say something also?
Sure, I'm just going to close it off, but I want to
Mhm.
thank all three of you for being part of this. Alona, you pointed out that there's far too much discussion on the left, especially in the Western countries, that simply refuses to see Ukrainians as as people with agency. And if we find it not, there's just too much of viewing Eastern Europe as a chessboard, and Ukraine, it should be like some kind of chess piece that we move over to Russia's side to make the other countries safer, etc. So today's webinar was hosted by Veterans for Peace for Ukraine, a caucus of Veterans for Peace. I do have to say that the Veterans for Peace National Board, which I am a part of, will probably tell us we can no longer be a caucus. That's sad, but we'll continue during the work anyways. I'm thinking we will be the Veterans for Peace for Ukraine unauthorized pirate faction. I think that just sounds cool. We'll be able to have a pirate flag. But we are doing this in the spirit of the Veterans for Peace principle of centering the voices of the victims of war, which is you folks, Ukraine. And we should be able to do this as well as for example, Veterans for Peace, the Free Palestine project. We can do both. We can support people in Palestine, and we can support people in Ukraine. We are peace activists. That doesn't, I don't have any guns to send you. My organization doesn't have any missiles to send you. But that doesn't mean we should work with and conspire with those people that want to take away your right to self-defense. My background is a conscience objector. I went to prison instead of fighting a U.S. war. And I'm the director of an organization called Courage to Resist, and we support all war resistors. And we are funding a conscience objector hotline based in Germany that is giving advice to objectors to the Russian war in Ukraine from all sides: Belarus, Russia, and a few Ukrainians. Obviously, there's many, many, many more Russians refusing to fight than Ukrainians, but there are Ukrainians refusing to fight. And we absolutely believe that no person should be forced to take another person's life if it opposes their conscience. And we are also disappointed that the Ukrainian government isn't allowing many men to leave the country, especially conscience objectors. That's no way a moral equivalency with what Russian occupation is doing in Ukraine. That's just part of our work, and we're proud of doing that work. And again, I'm delighted to be able to like highlight your voices, and we need more of this person-to-person contact, and to just cut through some of the nonsense that we're hearing. So thank you, absolutely appreciate it. So courageresist.org, veteransforpeace.org, and for the Veterans for Peace for Ukraine project, VFP, the number 4 Ukraine.org. And thank you, everyone, for your time. Good night.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.